Thank you, David. Thank you. That was wonderful. I am pleased to be able to introduce to you a very talented individual. We're lucky to be able to get such great speakers, and this particular speaker happens to be a member of this community. He is Cass Midgley. Many of you know him. Midgley earned his master's in theological studies from Vanderbilt Divinity School in 2013 as an atheist. Bring it. His infatuation with God began at childhood. For the first 40 years of his life, he and God were close personal friends. For 12 years, Cass served in pastoral ministry at 2 non-denominational evangelical churches, one of which he founded. Think of that. He founded the church as an atheist. That's pretty, no, not then? Oh, well, obviously I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing. It would have been good, though. You could still do that. I'm just saying, that memoir would be that much. He left ministry in 2005 and began deconstructing his childhood faith until there was nothing left, except that which was there all along, love. Today, he manages the office at Vanderbilt Department of Anthropology, owns a paralegal business, and is founder and co-host of the podcast Everyone's Agnostic, along with Bob Pondillo. Please welcome back Cass Midgley. Thank you, Cass.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Just off the bat, I had an Egg McMuffin this morning that's really giving me heartburn. Does anybody have Tums? I do. Do you have Tums? That would be a lifesaver. I might end up throwing up on this podium if not. Thank you. The other thing is that you should know is that I have a thing called essential tremor. Have you ever heard of that? I shake 24/7. And I shake even more when I'm in front of people. So I'm going to try to get this to my mouth without. Thank you so much. He beat you. Oh, yeah, thanks. Wow, you guys are great. I might get around to talking here in a little bit. All right, so I am a humanist chaplain and a celebrant, and I know there's others here that marry and bury in a secular sense. We do secular weddings and funerals and memorials and such. But the thing about chaplaincy is, just before I get into chaplaincy, I threw up keep going with it. I threw up a picture of Bob and I in action at the Everyone's Agnostic podcast. We just put out episode 106, and it's been a wonderful journey. I hope you've been able to listen to maybe a few episodes. But chaplaincy shows up in hospitals, military, prisons, universities. And I was reminded this morning on NPR, did anybody hear this story this morning getting ready for church, that the police have chaplains. And it's kind of become a big deal in the tensions between those that they serve and protect and what we have going on right now as a nation. And so the role of chaplaincy is trying to become an intermediary and a mediation between the conflict of the people and the police. So one of the things that these 4 things have in common, or 5, is, police not so much, but these 4 are homes away from home. And they're usually involved in trauma, stress, hardship. And the role of chaplain, as you know, is you can maybe go see a therapist, or you could talk to your best friend. Those are always options. But maybe you've already talked to your best friends, and maybe you don't have $150 an hour, and you want to talk to a chaplain. And the funny thing about chaplains is, in a hospital, they might just have one chaplain that's just like generic chaplain for the whole place, and he just kind of has to tread and determine who he's talking to and their faith and their journey. But in a college campus like Vanderbilt, they have basically almost a chaplain per religion and per denomination within that religion. So you got a Methodist, a Presbyterian, Church of Christ probably. I mean, I don't know what all's over there, but they do have, and they're getting an imam, a Muslim. They have Jewish rabbi. They have Catholic. They have a lot. But as we know, and now especially with the Pew Research, that there's probably 40 to 50% of that campus that is not students that are not churched or not involved in organized religion, don't care to be, the nuns. And so it's been a concern of the head chaplain, Mark Forrester, is a friend of mine, that demographic of the body politic or the student body are not represented by any of the chaplains. And historically, they were like, well, we don't need chaplains because that's a religious thing. But there are 8 universities in the United States that have humanist chaplains, most of which are Ivy League and progressive. And right now we're in talks with Vanderbilt to establish a humanist chaplain on the Vanderbilt campus. We've been in talks for a year, and there's really no definite thing in sight. There was. We were going to do it on March 31st of last year, and they ran into some trouble with the bylaws. And they are predicting and estimating that there will be pushback for such a thing, and they want to be able to be completely above the law when it comes to appointing a humanist chaplain, because somebody could sue the school and say, your own bylaws say you can't do this. And so there's a lot of red tape. But what follows is an example of a talk that I might have with students. And being the theme today is community, I'm a believer in community. The funny thing is I also am a believer in Descartes' hell is other people. I'm telling you, man, I hate people. And I love people. And that's the tension. And that's awkward. And I don't know about you, but I found this morning to be awkward. Because we're here, and we could be home in bed or home watching TV or home reading a book, but we push ourselves out into the public, and it's not easy. It's not comfortable. And sometimes it's awkward. And I believe it's worth it. That's just my... I mean, it has its payoffs. And you know, I mean, like, I don't know if it's C.S. Lewis, but some Christian wrote that another depiction of hell was just always wanting to be away from people and just keep moving and moving away from people until you're isolated, and that was his vision of hell. But there is a temptation to isolate oneself, and I know that I'm both an extrovert and an introvert, which means I get energy from being up here, but I also can't wait to get away from here. Okay, so the tension is that humanism is not a religion. Why do you need a chaplain? But the truth is that humans universally go through stuff. Bad stuff, hard stuff. In the case of college students, stress over finals, they broke up with a lover, maybe they lost their grandmother, and they need somebody to talk to. But they don't want to talk to somebody who's going to say, you'll see her again someday. They don't want to talk to somebody that doesn't share their worldview and their ideologies. And so that's the role. One way the word religion has been kind of weaponized as late, and maybe for decades. And I think it goes both ways. I heard some of you, we had some friends that went Thursday to Kentucky to protest the Ark. And some of these Facebook feeds that throw up live video, there was, Aaron Ra was in a debate with a guy, and the guy said, well, your religion is Darwinism. And he's using that word as a derogative. I mean, not just Darwinism, but the religion. And then, of course, I'm constantly guilty of, on the podcast and other places, just saying, well, religion is stupid, or implying it in some way. And religion has become a word that is... But I appreciate, right here in Nashville, we have a great guy, and he's a Christian, but he's a really good thinker. He's a graduate of Vanderbilt Divinity. He was one of the inspirations for me to go there. His name's David Dark, and he wrote a book called Life's Too Short to Pretend You're Not Religious. And he's basically trying to de-weaponize the word religion. And in his definition, religion consists of all the influences and the traditions that drive us. The music you like, the issues you care about, the TV shows and movies you watch, the authors you read, the poetry that touches you, the habits and rituals that you practice. These all constitute one's religion. And there is another lighter use of that word that we're all familiar with. If somebody says, I go to the farmer's market every Saturday religiously. And that just means devotedly. I go every week or I go regularly. It's a big deal to me. And so this is another way to look at the word religion. And I'm always looking for ways to equip myself with the tools to have compassion on people different than me. And one of the things that maybe some of you deconverters have experienced is when you first deconvert from Christianity, you're pretty angry. When you figure out there's no Santa Claus and you've been lied to for the first 39 years of your life. And then you bought it and you spent so much money and so much time and so much of your life to what turns out to be a myth and a narrative that gives some people's lives meaning, and it gave mine meaning, but I'll be darned if I wasn't mad. So at first, I basically just was angry and hated all religious people. And so now maybe, I'm 11 years out from that point, and so I think the maturation and the evolution of my own heart is looking for tools that I can exercise towards people that still believe that stuff. And I'm going to give you some tonight, or this morning. Another thing, there's a book called This I Believe, and this was an NPR thing, and I think there's maybe 2 or 3 issues of it now. But this book contains about 80 testimonies. I call this a toilet book, just put it by the toilet. Each person, one by one, maybe 2 pages max, just shares a little thing of what they believe. And in no case was it religious per se. There was a lot of talk of, some are living and some are dead. For example, Bill Gates, Newt Gingrich, Brian Greene. And then some they extracted from other writings like Albert Einstein and Helen Keller. But they just basically said, I believe in blank. And it could be vegetable garden. And this book at the time of my deconversion really gave me license to find something else to believe in and fill that void. Because belief is kind of a hot button word, isn't it? Because we as meaning-making creatures, where do we find our meaning? We find it in culture. And what I call identifiers, which is kind of a part of culture, which is I came out of the womb, guess what? I'm white. And I'm physiologically male, and I happen to be cis-identifying male. And I happen to be about 80% straight. And I'm on the Kinsey scale, right? And I happen to be musical, or I happen to be athletic, or I used to be. And these are my identifiers. And so this is what gives my life meaning. For me, it was playing the drums at age 9. And this was my identifier. It became my culture. And of course, the culture also in that case was Presbyterian Church I was raised in. And we all have our stories. And that's the third thing there is narrative. My father was a banker. My grandfather was a banker and a cattle rancher. My great-grandfather was a cattle rancher and an oil man. And this is the story that we find ourselves in. And so this is what gives our life meaning. Now, obviously, there's other narratives that people use to give their life meaning, and we call these master narratives religion, what Camus called philosophical suicide. One thing that I'm admitting as I get older and as I get further into my non-theism is I realize that I am, like all of us, a meaning-making, storytelling, pattern-seeking creature. But I'm getting better, or maybe releasing myself from having to feed that need all the time. Getting more comfortable with meaninglessness. And that, ironically, feels really good. You wouldn't think so, and of course it's what horrifies everybody, and it's why we create a lot of grand narratives to numb or pacify that pain, the panic that could come, and we're going to get into that. I'll briefly touch on this. One of the things we run into in this community, what do we call ourselves, And I have David Silverman in my home on the podcast begging us, come out as atheists, you know. That's his thing, and I think that's fine. I do publicly proclaim that I'm an atheist. I'm also a humanist. I'm also a free thinker. I'm also a secularist. This word bright is kind of funny because it sounds like a boast. I'm bright. But we are brights is another word for us. But I love this word, naturalism, and being a naturalist. And here's why I love it. It's because it means a philosophical viewpoint according to which everything arises from natural properties and causes, and supernatural or spiritual explanations are excluded or discounted. So basically, like, I just like that. I'd like to be able to say, I'm a naturalist. And what does that mean? I don't believe in supernatural. Everything is what it is. And it is what it seems. And there's no magic behind it. Now, I also know, and I deal with this, is that a life void of magic and imagination might be lacking something. And so I do look for things, but here's where I find magic, is when I get back to that meaningless thing, to where it's like I've accepted meaninglessness, I have no hopes for humanity. I have no hopes for this day. I have like zero hopes, no expectations. Everything sucks, you know? And then when it doesn't, bam! It literally is magical at that point, because if you think about it, I mean, we all know that we all hit the cosmic lottery just by being here. I don't know how many millions of sperm had to, like, get out of the way of the one that made me. And then the fact that she was ovulating at that time or whatever. I mean, it's like, and then kaboom, and then cells divide. I get these color eyes and this, you know, boom, I'm here, and I think, and I experience, and I taste, and I see. Wow. So that's the magic to me, but it's based on reality and not supernaturalism. So where do naturalists get their meaning? Science. You know, when we were talking about all these words, like we believe in nature, we believe that there are no gods, and so we are an atheist. We believe in science. And I thought, well, why don't we call ourselves scientists? That word's been taken. So we believe in facts. We get our meaning from reality. We get and narratives, but we're careful about those narratives that they not be too fiction. And but some fiction is good. For example, I get meaning in my life, or at least I get maybe some framework when by some fiction. For example, Lord of the Rings. I love the fact that Frodo was the one to take the ring to Mordor. And this was a mission that had to succeed, right? And we saw Gandalf, as good-hearted as he was, he lusted after the ring because he had an agenda. We saw Aragorn, who was a good guy, and yet the ring would have destroyed him, like it did Gollum. And all these good people just really couldn't be trusted with the ring of power. Power corrupts absolutely, all that. And even some of the other hobbits, because I'm quick to say, well, it took a hobbit to get it to the Mordor. Except there were other hobbits there that did lust after the ring. And only Frodo really had the heart of gold and the purest heart to say, I don't give a damn about this ring. I don't give a damn about changing the world. I want to go back to the Shire and raise my garden. And so people that can be entrusted with power are people that are the least egoic. And I got that from a fictional narrative. And so sometimes fiction does give my life meaning, but I'm careful about which fiction. A couple of things that we don't get meaning from is anecdote. And I have to admit, I'm 50 years old, and I had to look up what anecdote mean. In this last year, I heard it on NPR, heard it on a podcast, heard somebody say it, and I thought, I really don't know what that means. I know I had that in class somewhere, but I have no idea what that means. So I had to look it up. And it means a short biographical account of a particular incident or event. Basically, it means somebody's personal story. An anecdote will almost always start with, one time. All right, so if the argument is brown eggs are better than white eggs, and somebody says, but one time I had some white eggs that were delicious. Well, that's an anecdote, right? And nobody's going to go, oh, theory, case closed, whites are superior based on your one little story. So we don't get meaning from anecdotes. And we don't solve cases or or resolve scientific theories by anecdotes. And religion is an anecdote. One time, a God became a man and walked on the earth, or whatever. So, master narratives. All right. So another thing is that where science doesn't know, it throws up its hands and keeps looking. And we call that the gaps. And theists have come along and said, we can fit a God in that gap, So where we don't know, for example, we don't know what started the Big Bang. We may never will. We don't know, but we're looking. But in the meantime, we don't know. And some of us are cool and okay with saying, don't know. Other people are anxious about that not knowing. And it makes them jittery and nervous. And God did it. Just fill it in quick. There's some anxiety around gaps. And I'm saying as naturalists, we don't fill those gaps in. We just leave them blank and we wait. Or at least, unless you're a scientist and get in the lab and figure it out, So we're comfortable with not knowing it. But what gives us that ease? Well, I want to introduce you to a couple of books. Back on episode 52 of Everyone's Agnostic, we did an episode that featured the book by Ernest Becker called The Denial of Death. And there's another book that came out recently with Dr. Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Pyszczynski called The Worm at the Core. And the role of death in life. And Becker was a cultural anthropologist who was interested in discovering why humans do what we do, and he put a lot of eggs in the basket of we do what we do largely because of our anxiety and terror, if you will, around death. The fear of death is the mainspring of human activity. And in Sheldon Solomon, psychologist that spent his life studying Ernest Becker and supporting his claims and theories with experiments, said, we don't want to face death directly. And so, just like most of us are unaware of the internal dynamics of the engine that drives our car, we are equally unaware of what it is that impels us to do what we do every day. Unique to humans, unlike other animals, we know we exist. We know that we're going to die, and we know that we could at any second die of any means beyond our control. Each of us must live with this terror. Becker's claim is that in order to be able to get up in the morning, we embed ourselves in carefully constructed symbolic belief systems that the anthropologists call culture. Culture gives us each a sense that life has meaning and that we have value. By offering us assurances of immortality, either literally through the afterlife or by the prospect that some vestige of ourselves will persist after we die. For example, having kids, or amassing great fortunes, or producing great works of art, or science, or athleticism. Yet no culturally constructed symbolic belief system is ever powerful enough to completely eradicate the anxiety that is engendered by the awareness of death. Around 5 to 9 years ago or so, around 5 to 9 years of age or so, children, in light of their intellectual and emotional maturation, become explicitly self-aware to the point where they recognize that their parents are not the omniscient and omnipotent creatures they once thought. That they are not fallible, that they are not only fallible, but finite. So this is a child coming into the awareness that their parents are fallible, and they're going to die, and I'm going to die. And these awarenesses are paralyzing. And this is Becker's theory, and that we have to come up with ways to suppress that anxiety. And it's at this point that we switch our psychological allegiance from relying solely on our parents as the basis for psychological security to these cultures that we find ourselves in and those we create. Rather than just being a good boy or girl now, we want to be a good American, a good German, a good Christian, a good fill in the blank, depending upon the culture and the construct upon which our identity is ultimately centered. And the more anxious we are about the meaninglessness of life, the more defensive we'll be about our identities, our culture, and its superiority to others. It's really, that's it in a nutshell. I mean, what happens is the drive to compete, the drive to be great, the drive to be better than you. So on those identifiers, like, so one of the things I told you when I got out of the womb and I was white. But if I fear death, and I'm not even aware that I fear death, and I don't even know why I'm doing it, then one of the things that I want to do is I want to be the best. I want to be great. And so I just look to my identifiers. Well, I'm white, so whites are the best, and whites are great and superior. Or I'm an athlete, then my team's better than yours. I mean, the thing that drives the human being every day is this kicking and scratching, almost like a drowning victim for oxygen. I matter. Because the most horrifying thing is the next slide. We're insignificant. Now, on a college campus where I might be chaplain, I already counsel with kids, even though I'm not the official title yet. But when we meet with groups of kids that have maybe transitioned from a childhood faith, but fortunately they're like in their late teens, early 20s, and they have less recovery or trauma to get over, like I did when I was 39, and I basically admitted there was no Santa Claus. And so helping kids find meaning based on reality. Like not giving into the temptation to kid ourselves or lie to ourselves or tell ourselves a story. I mean, in this case, this really is a place where religion and things become the opiate that numbs that fear and the anxiety that's built up around my impending death and the meaninglessness of my life. If our lives, as Bart Campolo, I was thinking of Tony Campolo, but as Bart Campolo once said, when your life is bookended by unconsciousness, things go up in value in a supply and demand economy by its scarcity. And so when you think you have eternal life, it cheapens life. When you realize this is it, this moment is it. Each of us know for a fact that we could die in a car accident on the way home from church today, from Sunday assembly today. And so this is a crazy valuable moment. And I think that the secular mindset and the naturalist mindset gives value to that. So I have a little bit more to say, but I'm out of time. I just want to fly through these. One of the things I say on the show every week is be a yes-sayer to what is. And so part of what I mean by that is, so I've just shared with you a stark reality, a harsh, absurd reality. And you have the option, as the free moral agent of your own autonomy, to go la 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 and say no to what I just said. I believe that the evidence supports what I just said, that your life is probably sandwiched in unconsciousness, that for the most part, other than the subjective meaning that you give it in your little world, like your loved ones, your family, your friends, your craft, your career, this is your meaning. But extant objective meaning, probably not. Probably not any meaning. And I was thinking, my mom was talking about her grandfather, and she's 88, so you can imagine how long ago he died. And then she was talking about an episode she had with him, and it just made me wish that I had, because so much of our lives are now on videotape, because everybody's got a phone and there's a camera on every corner. I just thought, I really wish that I had some tape of him, because he sounds like a really great guy. And in that context, I just thought, I never will, and nobody ever will, and nobody even knows who he was. I mean, and everybody who did know who he was is dead. I mean, unless you're in the encyclopedia, which again is why people get in the encyclopedia. I think a lot of people are driven to set a gold medal or break a world record so that some remnant of themselves survives their death. Again, the drive. I mean, I think about that bicyclist that took all those drugs and lied to the world or whatever. I mean, it's like the drive to be significant is a pretty strong drive. So again, I'm just saying, I've just shared with you a very daunting fact, and I think there's yes-sayers and there's no-sayers when it comes to the truth. And I think religionists are no-sayers. Hate to be frank, but I think they look at reality and say, no. Nope, I live forever. I say your life's meaningless. Nope. You know, or, you know, there's no God that cares about you. To me, that's evident. But nope, there is a God that cares about me. So yes-sayers, relaxed, chill, courageous, and they're peacemakers. I think no-sayers are anxious, panicked, fearful, and extremists. That's just my observation. So we both yes-sayers and no-sayers, get their definition from those three things, get their meaning from those three things. Let me see where we're at. So go to the next one. I can't remember what order this is, if it goes first. Okay, so first, just real quick, the no-sayers. I think that the culture, that it would be religion, and I think they find strength and safety in numbers. And this is why I think some atheists are averse to Sunday assembly or gatherings or free thinkers meetups or whatever, is I don't need the group. In fact, I'm a little suspicious of group think. And well, you should. But what we're saying is that we're not here because we need the strength and safety of the numbers. Like, hopefully your personal constructs are so robust and you've worked at them hard enough. You didn't literally get them from somebody else. You've earned them. You went to the library. You read a few books, and your world construct or your beliefs are girded enough to where you're not necessarily needing this to feel the strength and safety of numbers. So, and I think religion does that. So identifiers, look at the energy in which people say, I'm American, you know? And the thing is patriotism is an interesting adjective, right? Because people express it differently. And there's a fine line. Not even a fine line. I think it's a big, broad line where you cross over into nationalism. And then I'm going to go through a sermon without saying Hitler. But, you can see where, can't make it. I never can. But so nationalism and then competitive. Now, competition amongst friends is beautiful. Competition at the expense of the other and to elevate oneself, to step on their head to get higher, not good. And this is what I think no saying and, pardon? Corporatism. Yeah, corporatism's one, the one way it shows up. So, and then just seeking immortality. That's one way that shows up. And then the narratives that no-sayers dive into are often not just lies, but at least hyperbolic, supernatural. And there's a drive for their story to be supreme. And this explains 100 wars. My God's better than your God. And it's important. They did some tests where people who were conscious of their death, because they would do things to bring death awareness to the fore of their minds, and then they would be confronted with maybe pictures, and then they would measure their heart rate or whatever. They're just doing all kinds of tests. They did a judge to see if he would be harsher before walking into his bench, he'd read a piece that was about death and about his own death. So the more it's on the fore of your mind, the more likely you are to be hostile toward people different than you. Because it's so important that you're on the right path. Every ideological group of thinkers think they're right. If they didn't, they'd change. It's just innate. It's inherent in that thing that if you've adopted some ideologies, you're right. Yeah. And so when you're confronted with people that have different ones, it makes yours suspect, and that scares you. And the bottom feels like it's falling out. And then you go back to that fear of being insignificant. So I'll leave you with this poem. Jack Gilbert wrote, we must risk delight. We can do without pleasure, but not delight, not enjoyment. We must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. Thank you.